Sometimes doing the right thing feels like the loneliest path in the world, until you discover that someone's been watching your every move, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal that integrity still matters. Sheriff Jake Morrison was about to learn that his refusal to compromise his principles would lead to the biggest case of his career and restore his faith in justice. Hi everyone, welcome to LA Tales. Let's get started. Sheriff Jake Morrison had been protecting the people of Millbrook County for 12 years, and in all that time, he'd never faced a decision that would test his character like the one that walked into his office on a Tuesday morning in October. Millbrook was a kind of small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, where the biggest crime was usually teenagers vandalizing the water tower or someone driving under the influence after the annual Harvest Festival. Jake had grown up here, played football for the Millbrook Eagles, married his high school sweetheart, and never imagined he'd need to deal with anything more serious than domestic disputes and cattle rustling. That changed when the Cortez organization moved their operation into the county. It started small, reports of increased drug activity near the interstate, suspicious vehicles with out-of-state plates, and a gradual uptick in overdoses at the county hospital. Jake had been tracking the pattern for months, building cases against low-level dealers and trying to work his way up the chain. But every time he got close to making a significant arrest, witnesses would suddenly refuse to cooperate, evidence would disappear, or suspects would vanish overnight. Jake began to suspect that someone in local law enforcement was feeding information to the drug dealers. He'd been careful to limit his investigations to a small circle of trusted deputies, but the leaks continued. It was frustrating and dangerous, not just for his cases, but for the safety of anyone willing to help law enforcement. The breakthrough came when Jake arrested Tommy Vickers, a mid-level dealer who'd been caught with enough methamphetamine to face serious federal charges. Tommy was scared and willing to talk, but only to Jake directly. He claimed to have information about corruption within the sheriff's department and insisted on speaking only to the sheriff himself. Sheriff Morrison, Tommy had said during their interview, his hands shaking as he sat in the county jail, "You don't know how deep this goes. They've got people inside your department, inside the prosecutor's office, maybe even inside the state police. But I know who the real boss is, and I know how they're moving product through your county." Jake had been skeptical at first, but Tommy's information checked out. He provided details about drug shipments, storage locations, and distribution networks that Jake's own investigations had been unable to uncover. More importantly, he explained how the Cortez organization had been systematically corrupting local officials to protect their operation. "They try to buy everyone," Tommy explained. "They start with small amounts, a few thousand here and there for looking the other way. Then it gets bigger. Before you know it, you're in so deep you can't get out." Jake felt sick as he listened to Tommy describe how several people he'd trusted had been compromised. The pattern explained everything. Why his investigations kept hitting dead ends, why witnesses changed their stories, why evidence disappeared from secure locations. "Sheriff," Tommy continued, "they're going to try to buy you too. They've been watching you, studying your patterns, your finances, your family. They know you've been getting close to their operation. What makes you think I'd take their money?" Jake asked, offended by the suggestion. Tommy looked at him with something like pity, because they don't usually take no for an answer, and because they've got enough money to make it very tempting. 3 days later, Jake discovered exactly what Tommy meant. He was working late at the sheriff's office, reviewing case files and trying to identify which of his officers might be compromised, when he heard a knock at his door. It was after 9 p.m., and the building should have been empty except for the night dispatch officer. "Come in," Jake called, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon. 2 men in expensive suits walked into his office. Jake didn't recognize them, but everything about their appearance screamed money and danger. The older man, probably in his 50s with silver hair and cold eyes, introduced himself as Mr. Santos. The younger one, built like a linebacker but wearing a $1,000 suit, remained silent. "Sheriff Morrison," Santos said, settling into the chair across from Jake's desk without being invited. "I understand you've been investigating some business activities in your county." Jake's instincts were screaming danger, but he kept his voice steady. "I investigate all criminal activities in my jurisdiction. That's my job." Santos smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, and you do it very well. That's why we're here." He reached into his jacket, and Jake tensed until Santos pulled out not a weapon, but a manila envelope. He placed it on Jake's desk and slid it forward. "Sheriff, we're prepared to make you a very generous offer for your cooperation. We're not asking you to do anything illegal, just to prioritize certain cases over others. Focus on the real problems: violent crime, property crime, things that actually hurt your community." Jake stared at the envelope without touching it. "What's in there?" $50,000, Santos said casually. "Cash. Completely untraceable. Consider a consulting fee for helping us understand how to operate our business in compliance with local priorities." Jake felt his blood run cold. $50,000 was more than his annual salary. It was enough to pay off his mortgage, put his daughter through college, finally take the vacation his wife had been dreaming about for years. "And what exactly would I be consulting on?" Jake asked, his voice carefully neutral. Santos leaned back in his chair. "Very simple. We have certain shipments that pass through your county. Sometimes our drivers might be stopped for minor traffic violations. If you could ensure those stops don't result in unnecessary searches or delays, we'd be very grateful." "You're asking me to ignore drug trafficking." "I'm asking you to prioritize your resources efficiently," Santos corrected. "We're not selling to children or operating in your schools. We're simply moving product through your county to markets elsewhere. Our business actually reduces local crime because we eliminate competition." The younger man spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly soft. "Sheriff, we've done our research. Your department is underfunded. Your officers are overworked, and you're facing budget cuts next year. This money could solve a lot of problems." Jake looked at the envelope again, thinking about his wife working double shifts at the hospital to help make ends meet, about his daughter who'd been accepted to state university but might not be able to afford it, about the new patrol cars his department desperately needed but couldn't afford. "You want an answer now?" Jake asked. Santos nodded. "We prefer to conclude our business arrangements quickly." Jake stood up, walked around his desk, and picked up the envelope. For a moment, Santos smiled with satisfaction. Then Jake opened his desk drawer, pulled out an evidence bag, and dropped the envelope inside. "Mr. Santos, you're under arrest for attempted bribery of a public official." The room went silent. Santos's face went from confident to shocked to furious in the span of seconds. The younger man's hand moved toward his jacket, but Jake already had his weapon drawn. "I wouldn't," Jake said calmly. "Hand where I can see them, both of you." "Sheriff Morrison," Santos said, his voice now containing a clear threat, "I think you're making a very serious mistake." "The only mistake will be taking your money," Jake replied, reaching for his radio to call for backup. "You picked the wrong sheriff to try to buy." As Jake's deputies arrived to take Santos and his companion into custody, Santos delivered a final warning that would haunt Jake for the next 48 hours. "Sheriff, you have no idea what you've just done. You think you're protecting your community, but you've just made it much more dangerous for everyone you care about." The arrest should have felt like a victory, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just painted a target on his back and possibly on his family as well. Over the next 2 days, Jake's paranoia seemed justified. Unmarked cars appeared near his house and his daughter's school. His wife reported being followed while running errands. The phones at the sheriff's office received anonymous calls threatening retaliation against Jake and his family. Most disturbing of all, Jake discovered that Santos and his companion had been released on bail within hours of their arrest. Their expensive lawyers had immediately filed motions to suppress evidence and dismiss charges, claiming entrapment and illegal detention. "Sheriff," his chief deputy, Michael Torres, said during a tense meeting Wednesday morning, "maybe we should consider protection details for your family. These people obviously have resources and connections." Jake had been thinking the same thing, but the county budget couldn't support round-the-clock protection for his family. He'd have to rely on his own vigilance and the loyalty of his deputies, assuming he could still trust them. That afternoon brought more troubling news. The county prosecutor, District Attorney Patricia Williams, called to inform him that the bribery charges against Santos might not stick. "Jake, Their lawyers are claiming the money was a legitimate political contribution intended for your re-election campaign, she explained. Without clear evidence of quid pro quo, it's going to be difficult to prove criminal intent. Patricia, he explicitly asked me to ignore drug trafficking in exchange for money. I have it all on the recording. What recording? Jake felt his stomach drop. The security cameras in my office. They record audio and video of all meetings. There was a pause. Jake, I reviewed the footage. The audio is corrupted. All we have is video of a conversation with no sound. Jake knew immediately what had happened. Someone with access to the sheriff's office had tampered with the evidence. Someone he trusted had betrayed him to protect the Cortez organization. Sheriff, Patricia continued, I'm going to do everything I can to prosecute this case, but you need to be realistic about the challenges we're facing. That evening, Jake sat at his kitchen table with his wife, Sarah, trying to decide whether to move his family out of town until the situation resolved itself. His 14-year-old daughter, Emma, was upstairs doing homework, blissfully unaware that her father's integrity had potentially put their entire family in danger. Jake, Sarah said, holding his hand across the table, I'm proud of you for not taking their money, but I'm scared about what comes next. Jake was scared too, but he was also angry. Angry that criminals felt they could buy and intimidate their way out of justice. Angry that corruption had infiltrated his department. Angry that doing the right thing seemed to come with such a high price. We'll get through this, he told Sarah, though he wasn't sure how. I won't let them win. Thursday evening, Jake was working late again, reviewing personnel files and trying to identify which of his officers might have compromised evidence, when he heard vehicles pulling into the parking lot. Multiple vehicles, by the sound of it. Jake looked out his window and felt his blood run cold. 3 black SUVs were parked outside the sheriff's office, and men in dark suits were walking toward the building. For a moment, Jake thought Santos had made good on his threats. But as the men approached his office, Jake noticed something that changed everything. The small, discreet badges they wore identified them as federal agents. The lead agent knocked on Jake's door and identified himself through the glass. Sheriff Morrison? I'm Special Agent David Rodriguez with the FBI. We need to talk. Jake opened the door, his mind racing through possibilities. Were they here to arrest him? Had Santos somehow convinced the federal government that Jake was corrupt? Or was there something else entirely? Sheriff Morrison, Agent Rodriguez said as he and 2 other agents entered Jake's office, we understand you had an interesting conversation with Mr. Santos 3 days ago. Jake's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, but Agent Rodriguez raised his hand peacefully. Sheriff, we're not here to arrest you. We're here because you've just become the most important witness in a federal investigation that's been ongoing for 2 years. What Agent Rodriguez told Jake next would explain everything. The corruption, the threats, the surveillance, and why Jake's refusal to take $50,000 had just made him the key to bringing down one of the largest drug operations in the region. Agent Rodriguez settled into the chair across from Jake's desk, the same chair where Santos had sat 3 days earlier offering $50,000 in cash. But this time, everything Jake thought he knew about his situation was about to change. Sheriff Morrison, Agent Rodriguez began, opening a thick file folder. For the past 18 months, the FBI has been conducting Operation Clean Sweep, a multi-state investigation into the Cortez drug organization. What happened in this office Tuesday night was the final test we needed to determine whether you could be trusted with what I'm about to tell you. Jake stared at the agent, his mind struggling to process the implications. You were watching? You knew they were going to try to bribe me. Agent Rodriguez nodded. We've been monitoring the Cortez organization's expansion into rural counties across 3 states. Their method is always the same. Identify key law enforcement officials, research their financial vulnerabilities, and make offers that seem impossible to refuse. He pulled out a series of photographs from his file. Sheriff Morrison, meet the officials who didn't pass the test. Jake looked at images of sheriffs, police chiefs, and prosecutors from counties across the region. Each photo was accompanied by documentation of bribes accepted, evidence suppressed, and investigations sabotaged. Sheriff William Turner from Riverside County took $75,000 to ignore drug shipments through his jurisdiction. Police Chief Marcus Webb from Oakville accepted $50,000 to provide advance warning of raids. District Attorney Jennifer Hayes from Mountain View County took $100,000 to ensure drug cases were plea bargained down to minor offenses. Jake felt sick as he realized the scope of the corruption. How many? 14 officials across 3 states, Agent Rodriguez replied grimly. The Cortez organization has been systematically corrupting rural law enforcement to create safe corridors for drug trafficking from Mexico to major cities on the East Coast. Agent Sarah Chun, one of the other FBI agents, leaned forward. Sheriff Morrison, you were the final test case. If they could buy you, they have complete control of drug trafficking through this entire region. But they couldn't buy me, Jake said, still processing the magnitude of what he was hearing. No, they couldn't, Agent Rodriguez confirmed. And that's why you're now the key to bringing down their entire operation. Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about the implications. The corruption in my department. You know about that too? Agent Rodriguez nodded sadly. We've been monitoring communications and financial records. I'm sorry to tell you that Deputy Marcus Fleming has been on the Cortez payroll for 8 months. He's been feeding them information about your investigations and sabotaging evidence when necessary. Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Marcus had been one of his most trusted deputies, someone he considered a friend. The security footage that was corrupted. Marcus had access to the evidence room and the technical knowledge to tamper with the recordings, Agent Chung confirmed. We have him on surveillance doing exactly that Wednesday morning. What about District Attorney Williams? Is she compromised too? No, Agent Rodriguez said. Patricia Williams is clean, but she's been working with incomplete information because of the leaks in your department. We couldn't risk involving her in the investigation until we were certain about your integrity. Jake's head was spinning with revelations, but one question dominated his thoughts. What happens now? Agent Rodriguez smiled for the first time since entering Jake's office. Now, Sheriff Morrison, you help us take down the entire Cortez organization and clean up law enforcement corruption across 3 states. Agent Chin pulled out another file. Sheriff, we need you to continue your normal routine while wearing recording equipment. We want to document every attempt to corrupt or intimidate you. We also need you to help us coordinate arrests of compromised officials. You're asking me to be an undercover agent in my own department, Jake said. We're asking you to do what you've been doing all along. Your job, Agent Rodriguez replied. The only difference is that now you'll have federal backup and protection. Over the next hour, the FBI agents briefed Jake on the full scope of Operation Clean Sweep. The investigation involved multiple federal agencies, including the DEA, ATF, and Treasury Department. They'd been building cases against the Cortez organization for 2 years, gathering evidence of drug trafficking, money laundering, weapons violations, and public corruption. Sheriff Morrison, Agent Rodriguez explained, the Cortez organization moves over $50 million worth of drugs through this region annually. They've corrupted local officials, intimidated witnesses, and essentially created their own protected territory for criminal activity. But they made one crucial mistake, Agent Chen added. They assumed that every law enforcement officer had a price. They never considered that someone might refuse their money and choose to do the right thing regardless of the personal cost. Jake thought about his family, about the threats they'd received, about the financial pressures that had made the $50,000 so tempting. What about protection for my wife and daughter? These people have made it clear they don't hesitate to threaten families. Sheriff, your family has been under discreet federal protection since Tuesday night, Agent Rodriguez assured him. We've had agents monitoring your home, your daughter's school, and your wife's workplace. The surveillance you noticed wasn't from the Cortez organization. It was from us, making sure they stayed safe. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. His family was safe, and he wasn't fighting this battle alone. Now, Agent Chin said, pulling out sophisticated recording equipment, we need to prepare you for what comes next. Santos and his associates are going to escalate their pressure on you. They'll try bigger bribes, more serious threats, and possibly direct action against you or your department. Agent Rodriguez opened another file containing surveillance photos. We've identified at least 6 Cortez operatives who've moved into your county since Tuesday. They're preparing for a confrontation, possibly planning to eliminate you as a threat to their operation. The reality of the danger hit Jake, like a cold wave. These weren't just drug dealers trying to buy his cooperation. They were potentially violent criminals who saw him as an obstacle to be removed. "Sheriff, we need to move quickly," Agent Rodriguez continued. "Tomorrow morning, we're executing coordinated arrests across 3 states. 14 compromised officials, 37 drug organization members, and seizures of assets worth over $200 million. What do you need me to do?" Agent Chun handed him a small device that looked like a button. "Tomorrow at exactly 9 a.m., you'll receive a call from Santos offering you one final chance to cooperate. This time, he'll probably offer much more money and make explicit threats against your family. We need you to refuse again, and we need it all recorded." At 9:15 a.m., Agent Rodriguez added, "Federal agents will simultaneously execute arrest warrants across the region. Santos will be arrested in your office while attempting to bribe or threaten a federal witness, you." Jake looked at the recording device, thinking about how surreal his life had become in just 3 days. And then what? "Then, Sheriff Morrison, you'll have helped dismantle one of the largest drug trafficking operations in the country," Agent Rodriguez said. "The corridors they created through rural counties will be closed. The officials they've corrupted will face federal charges. And communities across 3 states will be safer because one sheriff refused to be bought." Agent Chin leaned forward. "Sheriff, I need to be honest with you about something else. This case is going to make national news. Your refusal to take the bribe, your role in bringing down the organization, it's going to change your life." Jake hadn't considered the publicity aspect. He'd simply been trying to do his job and protect his community. The Justice Department wants to use your case as an example of how individual integrity can make a difference in fighting corruption, Agent Rodriguez explained. "You'll probably be asked to speak at law enforcement conferences, testify before Congress about rural drug trafficking, and serve as a model for other departments facing similar pressures." "I didn't do anything special," Jake protested. "I just refused to take money that wasn't mine." "Sheriff Morrison," Agent Chin said with a smile, "in a region where 14 other officials took the money, what you did was very special indeed." The next morning arrived with an unusual autumn storm, rain pounding against the windows of the sheriff's office as Jake prepared for what would be the most important phone call of his career. FBI agents were positioned throughout the building, ready to move the moment Santos made his final offer. At exactly 9 a.m., Jake's phone rang. "Sheriff Morrison." Santos's voice was different this time, harder, more dangerous. "I trust you had time to reconsider our conversation." Jake activated the recording device. "Mr. Santos, I thought I made my position clear. I'm not interested in your money." "Sheriff, you misunderstand the situation. This isn't a negotiation anymore. We're prepared to offer you $200,000 to resign your position and move your family out of county." Jake's breath caught. $200,000. Enough to start over anywhere, to give his family security he'd never dreamed of providing. "And if I refuse?" Santos's voice turned ice cold. "Then we'll be forced to conclude that you represent an unacceptable risk to our business operations. Risks must be eliminated, Sheriff Morrison, for the safety of everyone involved. Are you threatening me and my family? I'm offering you a choice. Take the money and leave, or face the consequences of interfering with our business." Jake looked through his office window at the FBI agents positioned around the building, thought about his wife and daughter who were safe under federal protection, and made his final stand against corruption. "Mr. Santos, my answer is the same as it was 3 days ago. I won't take your money, I won't ignore your crimes, and I won't be intimidated by your threats." "Then you've sealed your fate, Sheriff Morrison." At that moment, FBI agents burst through Jake's office door with Santos and 2 armed associates in handcuffs. "Federal agents," Agent Rodriguez shouted. "Santos, you're under arrest for attempted bribery of a public official, threatening a federal witness, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances." Santos's face went white as he realized he'd been set up. "This is entrapment. You can't." "Actually, we can," Agent Chin interrupted. showing him the recording device. "We have everything on tape, including your threats against Sheriff Morrison and his family." As Santos was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at Jake with pure hatred. "This isn't over, Sheriff." "Yes, it is," Jake replied calmly. "It's completely over." Over the next several hours, Jake watched news reports of simultaneous arrests across 3 states. The scope of Operation Clean Sweep was staggering. Millions of dollars in drugs seized, corrupt officials arrested, and an entire criminal organization dismantled. Deputy Marcus Fleming was arrested at his home, charged with accepting bribes and obstruction of justice. Jake felt betrayed, but also relieved that the leak in his department had finally been identified and eliminated. 6 months later, Jake stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing a joint session Congress about rural drug trafficking and public corruption. The boy who'd grown up in small-town Millbrook was now helping shape national policy on law enforcement integrity. "Honorable members of Congress," Jake said, looking out at the assembled representatives, "the choice between right and wrong isn't always easy, but it's always clear. When we allow criminals to buy our silence or our cooperation, we don't just compromise our own integrity. We abandon the communities we've sworn to protect." The speech was carried live on national television, and Jake received thousands of letters from law enforcement officers across the country who were inspired by his example. But the moment that meant the most to Jake came later that evening, when he called his wife from his hotel room in Washington. "How did it go?" Sarah asked. "Good, I think. But I'm ready to come home." "Emma and I are proud of you, Jake. You did the right thing." "It didn't feel like a choice," Jake replied. "It just felt like doing my job." "That's what makes you a hero, sweetheart. Heroes don't think they're doing anything special." Jake returned to Millbrook as a national figure, but he remained the same small-town sheriff who'd refused to be bought. The federal government provided additional funding for his department, enabling him to hire more deputies and purchase better equipment. The community rallied around him, proud that their sheriff had become a symbol of integrity in law enforcement. 3 years later, the Cortez organization was completely dismantled. Santos and his associates received lengthy federal prison sentences. The 14 corrupted officials were convicted and removed from office. The drug corridors through rural counties were permanently closed. Most importantly, Jake's example inspired other law enforcement officers to report corruption and resist criminal influence. Operation Clean Sweep became a template for federal agencies working to combat rural drug trafficking and public corruption. Jake never regretted his decision to refuse the $50,000, though he sometimes wondered what would have happened if he'd chosen differently. The answer came in letters from other sheriffs and police chiefs who'd faced similar choices and drawn strength from his example. Sheriff Morrison, one letter read, "When they offered me the money, I thought about you refusing their bribe even though it meant putting your family at risk. If you could do the right thing under those circumstances, I could do it too. Thank you for showing me what integrity looks like." In the end, Jake realized that his refusal to compromise hadn't just saved his own soul. It had helped preserve the integrity of law enforcement across the country. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons or force, but with the simple decision to do what's right regardless of the cost. And sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, you discover that you're not standing alone after all. Love this story? Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible tales of courage and integrity. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it.